So picture this. You wake up one morning, and the big news is that Iran has reopened the Strait of Hormuz. President Trump is on social media celebrating a huge win. But then, less than 24 hours later, the whole thing flips. The strait is slammed shut again, and now Iranian gunboats are attacking an oil tanker.
So what on earth is actually going on here? If you're feeling confused, well, you're not alone. It's a chaotic story, and frankly, a lot of the initial reports got it wrong. So let's break down what this high-stakes standoff is really all about.
Okay, so let's just walk through this timeline because it really gives you whiplash. April 17th, we get the good news. Iran announces the strait is reopening. Almost immediately, Trump claims a victory, but by the very next day, April 18th, it's a complete reversal. The strait is closed again, and shots have been fired. To really understand this chaos, we have to rewind the clock a little. This whole thing didn't just pop up out of nowhere last week. It all goes back to a massive military operation that completely shook up the entire region. It all kicked off on February 28th. That's when the U.S. and Israel launched this huge joint attack. The U.S. called it Operation Epic Fury. The initial strikes were just devastating, with reports that Iran's supreme leader and other top officials were killed. In just the first 12 hours, the U.S. alone conducted 900 strikes. Iran, of course, retaliated with a massive barrage of its own, and then it unleashed its most powerful economic weapon.
And that weapon wasn't a missile. It was control. Control over a tiny strip of water, a choke point that can hold the entire global economy hostage.
And that brings us to the single most important number in this whole conflict, 20%.
This is what's really at stake here. 20% of all the oil that gets shipped by sea anywhere on the planet passes through this one narrow strait. So when Iran closed it, they took a fifth of the world's seaborne oil supply off the market in an instant. You look at it on a map and it's just this tiny channel, only about 34 kilometers wide. But economically, it's the main artery for huge producers like Saudi Arabia, the UAE, and Qatar. Controlling this strait gives Iran just immense leverage over pretty much the entire world.
So how does all this lead to that crazy 24-hour reversal? Well, it's because the reopening was never a simple peace deal. It was something else entirely, a very calculated diplomatic test.
Here's the quid pro quo. Iran's offer to reopen the strait was never unconditional. Not at all. It was explicitly tied to one major, non-negotiable demand. The U.S. had to completely lift its crushing naval blockade of Iranian ports.
But the U.S. didn't see it as a negotiation. President Trump immediately framed Iran's conditional offer as a threat, stating very plainly that the United States would not tolerate what he called blackmail. Iran's view, of course, was the polar opposite. Their military command described the American blockade not as some legitimate pressure tactic, but as, and I'm quoting here, acts of piracy and maritime theft. The gap between those two positions is just enormous. So the U.S. essentially called Iran's bluff. The blockade remained firmly in place, and they continued to turn ships away from Iranian ports. Iran's test had failed, and their response was swift and decisive. They slammed the strait shut again. And this brings us right to the razor's edge we're on now. There's a temporary ceasefire, but it's set to expire on April 22nd. So what happens next? Well, it looks like there are three distinct possibilities.
Okay, so there are three ways this could play out. The best case scenario? A real deal is reached, the strait reopens, and oil markets finally calm down. The second path is just an extension of the ceasefire, basically kicking the can down the road while tensions just simmer. But the third path, the one many analysts are afraid is the most likely, is that the whole ceasefire collapses. If that happens, military operations would restart, and you can expect global oil prices to spike in a big way.
So after all of that, what's the bottom line here? What is this really, truly all about?
It's this. Iran's 24-hour reopening of the strait was not a sign of peace. It was a test to see if the U.S. would reciprocate by lifting its blockade, and the United States' answer was a firm no. This entire conflict really boils down to a fundamental standoff between two different kinds of power. On one side, you have the unparalleled military and economic might of the United States. On the other, you have Iran, with its back against the wall, holding a chokehold on a vital artery of the global economy.
And that leaves us with the central question. As that ceasefire deadline gets closer